Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Science Dispatch podcast. So good to be with you. My name is Cameron English, joined as always by Dr. Chuck Dinerstein, Director of Medicine at the American Council on Science and Health. Chuck.
I'm perfect. That's good to know. Could you tell my wife that?
you had me worried with a little bit of delay. I was concerned you're having a stroke or something over there.
Oh, hey, watch it there. I'm that age.
Speaking of diseases, we've got a disease to talk about. I guess it depends on who you are and what your motivations are and who's paying your bills. But there was some sort of a consensus document, I guess we could call it, published in the Lancet in mid-January of 2025. And they're looking at how we should classify obesity, and they're making a very extensive case that it needs to be classified as a disease. And our faithful Dr. Dinerstein read through this gargantuan piece of writing, so you don't have to, and wrote up the results. So Chuck, I'm very curious. What did you make of this?
Well, it's interesting because we've discussed this topic several times before. So I would start by saying I think that they did a very thorough job, and if you read the whole thing, you can see that they actually spent some time and effort trying to get the story right, at least from their point of view. I still think they're off a little bit, but we can get into those particular weeds in a minute. They assembled a group of 58 subject experts, and they used what's called the Delphi technique to get some kind of consensus, which is basically where they put a proposition before them, they vote on it, then they discuss it, and they keep voting on it until they reach a consensus. So this was the agreement of all of the experts, and because they basically were unanimous in their opinions, there's a lot of word crafting in the document to meet the needs of one faction over another. Predictably, the advocates called this as a great breakthrough, and the proponents of it said it was a biased group. They didn't look at all the right studies and all the usual things that we've come to know when we talk about consensus statements and guidelines. So I would like to use the term they're playing from the tobacco playbook, but it's really they're playing from the consensus playbook, in terms of the criticisms and the comments on it. So what they tried to do is to define obesity as a disease. And very much like the conversations that we've had in the past, they begin by pointing out that the advocates of that position feel that it's important because it ends patient shaming and because it opens up billable insurance so that it makes it more equitable access. But I mean, these are all things that we've said in the past. It's good to show that we're experts too, evidently. We just didn't get invited to the meeting. And predictably, the opponent, and they present the opponent's point of view, which is that by characterizing it as a disease, then you eliminate the role of personal responsibility in your weight. So I thought that was not an unreasonable place to begin. So they divide obesity into three categorizations, again in keeping with a lot of the comments. So one of the usual comments that's made is that when you describe obesity in terms of BMI, that there are people that have a very high BMI that are exceedingly healthy. For instance, the defensive or offensive line of any NFL football team has a very high BMI. They're going to have BMIs of 35 or 40. But there's a little argument that they are not, in fact, healthy. So the first categorization they make is the concept of obesity, period. And that obesity is nothing more than the excess fat, period. And that's probably the last time I'm in full agreement with them. Then they take a big leap from my point of view and describe clinical obesity, which is obesity the disease. And at that point, they reveal one of the horrible secrets of medicine that we really have tried to keep under wraps for centuries now, is that we really can't define disease because we can't really define health. And that's problematic. The best we can say is that when you don't feel normal or you're not able to act in your normal way, then you have some kind of DIS-EASE, dis-ease. And they labor under that because, as we've talked about, there are no biomarkers for obesity, the disease. There are biomarkers for obesity, the excess weight. At that point, they make use of a bit of wordplay. They say that clinical obesity is a disease that's caused solely by obesity. And then they mention things like inflammation, which we don't think of as a disease, but more as a pathologic process. And then they slide in the one where they're actually going to get some traction, which is a limitation on the activities of daily life. So if you are massively overweight and you cannot tie your shoes, if you are massively overweight and you have horrible pain in your knees from the stress on your knee joints from the weight, those are all instances of clinical obesity and deserve to be treated. The problem, of course, is that when you start talking about impairments of the activities of daily living, impairment is oftentimes in the eye of the beholder. And as I said in the article, are you impaired if you have to have a second seat belt when you get on the plane? Are you impaired if you require a special seat on the plane? So if that's an impairment, then yes, obesity is a disease. Otherwise, you may want to characterize it some other way. And finally, the last part, and then we can talk about it, is, of course, if there's a disease, then there must be a pre-disease. And so they talk about the idea of obesity in its preclinical state before it causes one of these limitations. And that really talks about obesity as a risk, which really gets back to where we began. So I think that they've made a little bit of progress by trying to parse out what could be clinical obesity. But I think that they were a little too slick with their words in terms of what they were actually able to find scientific evidence to say these are the diseases that result from obesity rather than these are the diseases that are enhanced by obesity.
Maybe I'm getting cynical in my old age, Dr. Dinerstein, but who benefits from this? Who gets paid if this becomes classified? You mentioned insurance companies.
They don't get paid.
Okay.
They're on the paying end. So,
okay. So maybe okay. I'm not sure how to structure this. Are the prescriptions for Ozempic going to go up if this classification?
Yes, of course. Yes. Okay. So what you're really asking is that traditional question from Watergate of follow the money. So if we follow the money, the beneficiaries are going to be the patient advocacy groups. The beneficiaries will be the pharmaceutical companies. The beneficiaries will be the bariatric surgeons. To some degree, we have to be fair and say it will be a benefit to people that are obese and in terms of getting treatment for what can be limiting conditions. And the people that will be paying for it will be the insurance companies. And because the insurance companies do not pay for anything, that money will come from everybody. So that I can see you laughing, but that they until the insurance companies are allowed to mint money, somebody else is paying those bills, and that it's going to be reflected in increased costs. And you'll see the tussle back and forth about lowering the prices of the GLP-1s, and there we are.
I'm trying to reverse engineer the argument in a sense, because as I read your story and then I started reading through the Lancet paper itself, and as you said, you can see this wordplay, you can see these subtle redefinitions, and to me, there's gaps in what's going on here. So you mentioned it's really difficult to define any kind of disease as one thing, but then when you look at some other conditions where there's been debate or whatever over how you classify them, I think of something like addiction. And I think you could classify almost anything as a disease using the sort of metrics they're using, right? So like in the case of addiction, and I'm looking at this book called Biology of Desire by Mark Lewis. He's a neuroscientist. And he points out that with addiction, you can see brain changes happening, but you can see that with almost any behavior that people learn, right? So by that definition, anything that's bad and that facilitates some sort of a physiologic change could be defined as a disease, and that's obviously too broad, right? So people that go around punching other people for no particular reason don't have a disease necessarily. There's behavioral modification in order, sure, but take that. What do you think?
I think you're 100% correct, and the fact that they talked about self-reported limitations of daily living is the area that if I was going to make a formal criticism, that's the area I would go after. Though to be fair, we have a very ambiguous feeling towards that. The example you chose was addiction, which is like obesity in the sense that we posit some personal responsibility for people that are addicted. We posit some personal responsibility for somebody that's massively overweight, and we don't posit the same responsibility to somebody that had a heart attack or that has diabetes, which would be the two diseases where diet seems to play a role in there, and that's part of our conflict. You don't, we'll take statins. Look at all the money that we spend on statins, and the only purpose of statins, unless you've had a heart attack, is to reduce your risk. We spend most of the money on risk reduction, which is very much, if we're looking for the analogy for this, would be all the dietary programs, all the Weight Watcher programs would be risk reduction for obesity. They should now, if we're going to cover statins, then we should be covering Weight Watchers. In some sense, if you're looking for where who profits from these particular descriptions, and it's odd that we do that. We do the same thing about nicotine. There are certain diseases that are sins, and then there are other diseases that are just bad luck. And that seems to be something that we need to be more consistent about. And the way the consistency is going to go is that we're going to go ahead and say, there may be some behavioral component on your part, then we're still going to help you out.
Yeah, it just seems that there's a bit of subjectivity, because everything you brought up presents that challenge. Is there some line between, on this side it's activity that's your fault, and on this side it's a disease? I don't know what I'm trying to say. I guess it strikes me as like there's no way to do this. And I'm reminded of something that Dr. David Katz said back in 2014 when we were still having the same stupid debate. He was writing in Nature, and he said, our bodies, our physiologies, and our genes haven't changed. They're the same as they ever were, evolutionarily. But what has changed is all of the environmental components, right? So we don't, like you, I could sit in this chair for the next 8 hours and have a very productive day. And I could order a burrito and some Irish whiskey to my front door.
Yes. Yes.
So in other words, like adapting to your environment in that way, which is not a good way, does that constitute a disease? I don't know. What do you think?
Well, you're going to see a lot of that coming from Washington, because that is the argument of the Make America Healthy, again, contingent when we talk about food as medicine, is that we are poisoning ourselves with our food supply and the ways that we've generated it. I tend to, when I look at that, I do look at other patterns, I think, in evolution, and I think that, this maybe will be a little bit of a stretch, but one of the things that people argue about with the current global climatic warming is that there seems that the seasonality is somewhat put off. That because it's warmer sooner, plants are blossoming sooner, and the insects are not necessarily there at the same time. That there's a break in the rhythm, and that you can only evolve so quickly. And that as the temperature changes, again, for whatever reason, it really doesn't matter to the discussion, our evolution is not keeping up with that temperature change. I think you can make a stronger argument that our body's metabolic evolution is not keeping up with how we've changed our food supply over the last 100 years. And so I think that they as with any good grift, there is a good piece of data somewhere in there that you can latch upon so that the misdirection can go on. And just to be mean about it, if you talk about obesity, this is a perfect example, because now that we said that obesity is a disease, especially preclinical obesity, which is nothing more than being fat, I can say that that Weight Watchers are the statins of pre-obesity. And if you're going to pay for the statins, then you should pay for the Weight Watchers or the Mediterranean diet or whatever it is. And I think that's where you're going to see the sleight of hand take place, because one of the things that becomes clear when you read the Lancet Commission report is it's very difficult to track down a disease that obesity causes. And we have very sparse evidence that reducing obesity in any one individual will significantly improve their overall health. When they talk about, they calculate health risk for coronary, and they'll include something like a BMI. So if you can reduce the BMI, then you reduce the risk. But we really have no evidence other than the math that that's actually taking place. And we won't have that evidence for a while.
Incidentally, I saw that Weight Watchers and these other weight loss programs, they're employing doctors now who can write you prescriptions for GLP-1s.
Yes.
Which is both brilliant marketing and only reinforces my cynicism because it's sort of like what they're saying, and this is going to a point that I would like you to address. They're sort of implying that these drugs are going to take away their market share, because if you can get on a GLP-1 and lose weight, you don't need Weight Watchers. So you just make the GLP-1 part of the bargain, right?
Right. Well, they are not alone. And what you haven't seen yet is the bariatric surgeons that are bringing a nutritionist on board and a GLP prescription too, because they're beginning to experience the same problem. I mean, if you look at it from that point of view, the only thing we had 30 years ago was dieting and some diet pills that were bad for you, and then we discovered bariatric surgery. Because of an operation that we used to do on ulcers, which we couldn't do anymore. One of the big side effects of a partial gastrectomy is you lost weight. They said, okay, it's no longer a bug, it's a feature. Now we'll do the operation to get rid of the weight. And that was the beginning of bariatric surgery. And bariatric surgery came in and they killed a lot of the diet programs, because even though there was an initial cost to doing it, it was kind of basically a one and done situation, and you could go back to kind of eating whatever you wanted, not certainly in the same quantities, but you could go back to eating what you wanted. So there was an advantage that. And now that the GLPs have come along, I can avoid surgery. All I have to do is kick in the money for the injections. So that's there, and you'll see in a year or so that there'll be a pill, to do the same thing, at another price point. The other interesting thing about the telehealth play on the GLPs is, and I saw this yesterday, the telehealth play on GLPs now covers acne, erectile dysfunction, hair loss, and weight. They're taking all of these things, and making them a telehealth play.
I mean, maybe this is the upside of all of this, is the debate is going to become moot, because these drugs are game changers, and you can tell by the documents like this. But I'm seeing all of the different interests complain one way or the other, right? The people who work in academic medicine are pissed off because they've been proposing these solutions like putting in more drinking fountains for 50 years, and now that pharma has come up with a drug that works, they're mad that they're not getting their, you know what I mean? So maybe this is good. Yes, call it a disease, prescribe everyone one of these drugs, and cut the obesity rate down by 40 or 50%, and then let's declare a massive public health victory and move on to stuff that matters. Because I'm just you know what I'm saying? I'm just kind of...
I think that it matters, but even the Lancet report says very clearly that food, the old concept of calories in, calories out, does not explain obesity. It's a multifactorial disease, and the part of it is diet, but there's an equal part of it that's exercise and genetics and culture, and they say we need more research to really understand it.
Of course we do. We always need more research, right? The quest for knowledge never ceases, especially when there's NIH grants to receive.
Yes.
Let me clarify, though. Helping people who are overweight is important. And I've been in that position for most of my life at different points. Like, this isn't a lack of sympathy. If you can give people drugs or whatever, a weight loss book, like whatever it does, do it. I think what I'm talking about more is the sort of wrangling that goes on, and, this equity consideration, and then this, doctors do this wrong. And it's like, okay, nothing changes, right? This is the same thing we've been talking about since 2000 or whatever.
This is, I guess, the guidelines playbook. I think we should work on developing that as a concept, because I'm working on talking about another problem. And then once again, anytime there's a criticism of a big study, it's always they're playing the tobacco playbook. I wish I could get a copy, so I would know all the rules in the playbook. But I think you're right. I think that a lot of this we're wasting our time. We should just say, okay, there's some of us that think it's a disease. We should go ahead and start paying for it. It's going to cost us X number of dollars. Do we want to do it or not? Yes or no, and go from there. You're going to pay the money anyway. When you have these, you're either going to pay for the prevention or you're going to pay for the disease when they have the diabetes, when they have the other obesity-related problems, you'll be paying for it then. And what's the adage there about a ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure? So, again, that's going to be part of the MAHA argument is that it's going to be cheaper to do that. But again, I would like to see some evidence that the GLPs improve our health. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind that they improve our weight. But whether they improve our health has yet to be shown.
Well, weren't they originally approved as drugs for type 2 diabetes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. They each, again, and you get, but it's like the bariatric surgery. There was a bug that's now a feature. One of the results of those drugs in terms of modifying and controlling your blood glucose was you lost weight. And so they took the same drug, they did a different set of studies, now looking simply at weight loss and got that indication, hence Mounjaro. Same drug, different dose, different study. And, and that opened the floodgates.
So I guess what I'm asking is if you lose weight, doesn't that alleviate a lot of the challenges you're talking about? So the pressure on your knee joints would go away, presumably. Your blood sugar is better regulated and so forth. Aren't these indicative that the drugs, or maybe this just hasn't been documented to a certain extent yet?
It hasn't been documented to any significant extent yet. So I think that's, it would be nice to see. It's kind of like the sugar tax on sugary beverages. There's absolutely great evidence that it stops people from drinking things that are taxed at a higher rate. But it has yet to show that it's making them any healthier, because there's a lot of things in addition to drinking a soda that go into making you healthy or unhealthy.
Well, it turns out there's sugar and other things that aren't taxed, believe it or not.
Oh, well, I find that very frightening. But not to worry, because we have a new label that's coming our way that's going to help us with that.
Always a new label. If you just put it on the box and you say, this is good, people will eat more of it. That always works.
Well, the interesting thing, they're going, as I started writing, of all the real estate in retail, the most valuable real estate in retail is the front of the package. And the FDA wants not only the front of the package, they want the top of the package. So to continue the metaphor, they want the penthouse. And that's where they want to put the new label, which will tell people whether the product is low in fat, low in sugar, and one more. God, I can't believe that I've forgotten the third most important thing. But then we'll know, so we'll be able to make our better choices.
Yeah, maybe they could put the calories and the nutrients on the box. I bet that would really help.
Oh, they put them on the back, so the people have not. That's been the problem. Is
Right.
they put it in the, you'll forgive this, the ghetto part of the retail, on the back of the package. They redlined that nutritional label to the back.
It's pretty exhausting to turn the cereal box 180 degrees and look
I know.
at the other side,
And who knew that Fruit Loops might not have all your caloric needs?
You don't say. Really?
I know.
I need some protein on top of cereal? Is that...
Well,
Oh, my goodness. Okay. All right. We're just kind of spinning our wheels. As you can tell, and as I've said, I find all of this a little taxing and ridiculous at this point. But I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, Chuck. Maybe this will be good and we'll get lots of people much healthier and healthcare costs will fall. I don't know. We'll see. Do you have a prediction before we go? What do you think is going to come of this?
I think that they will continue to have the conversation, and unless the Maha people push this through, which will be interesting to see, because it's a different group of oligarchs in town now. And they may have a different plan for our money.
Well, I haven't looked into this deeply, but my understanding is a lot of the Maha folks aren't very high on these drugs. You know, they're into the prevention. They're into they got to sell you their supplements and exercise books, and they can't really do that if you lose weight with the drug. So,
right. But again, as I said, if it's in one sense, you don't really want to treat the people that have clinical obesity because that's a defined group. People with preclinical, pre-obesity, that's huge. That's a huge group. That's everybody else.
yeah, most of us.
Okay, everybody is pre-obese, in that way. So they can have all the supplements and all the other things too.
All right, there you go, everyone. Another problem solved here on the Science Dispatch podcast. Chuck's article, if you have not read it, you should become a little smarter. It's called An Obesity Consensus. Is it a lifestyle choice, a risk factor, or a full-fledged disease? Based on this new consensus document, consensus playbook, whatever you want to call it, in the Lancet, which you can read. I'm not sure why you would want to, but you can do that as well. Our website is acsh.org. Go there, punch in your email address. We will send you the stories we publish. And then when you show up, you know what we're talking about. Follow us on X. It's at ACSH.org, and I am at CamJEnglish. We welcome your comments, your questions, your thoughtful poetry, whatever you have. Send it our way. Thank you so much, as always. We'll see you next time.